In this video, we're going to do a process review on my recent animation for the Pixel Daily's daily theme of Katana. Okay, so playing back at, I think it's 10x speed. First thing that I want to do is just lay out a setting. I had an idea of what I wanted to do with the character, I had an idea of the sequence of attacks. I just needed to get timing and try and figure out exactly scale of everything, how to fit it in nicely in a nice little square so it would present well for where it was going to be put, Twitter, Instagram, those kind of things. And so the first thing I did was set a scene, try and keep it simple for the background so the character can be the focus, and the katana specifically, and then blocking out major shapes. I did some shading on the katana just to make sure that it could stand out for the character, but then basically abandoned shading for now in the early phases, and went back to blocking out major shapes and making sure I had scale. Then we move on, once we have the idea of major shapes, to some of the more major keyframes of the animation. There's like no shading whatsoever right now. I wanted to keep it somewhat simple in terms of just a couple, like two color shading, main color, shade color for the most part, and then the only thing that I break that rule on would be the katana specifically, because that's the focus of the art piece. So we have, the anticipation point here, character rearing back. Initially, I had the character holding the sword at the ready at this nice 45-degree angle, but I ended up abandoning the 45-degree angle once I get into this process a little bit further, just because it messed with the loop. Having him slam down and nice clean, like flat sword as he lands the attack, or the reverse after the attack, turned into this really nice kind of like holding position to begin the next sequence of chop 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 attacks, and it made a nice blade that I could shade nicely. So I ended up abandoning the 45-degree angle ready stance, because I had it, you'll see here in a little bit, I had it at 45-degree angle for a couple frames, and then or go land flat and then hold for a couple frames at 45-degree angle and then rear back, but that ended up just not feeling good for the timing, and so I ended up just keeping it very simple for the sake of you're only making this in a day, and just ran with keep it flat or back. So doing a lot of just rotations here, in terms of like 90-degree rotations, 180-degree rotations, copy paste. You see, initially I didn't have multiple layers for the different pieces of the body. I had it all on one layer, which is like a mistake that I make early, and I thankfully have been correcting myself more recently. This has separated layers for his arms, his sword specifically, and then the body is kind of all encompassing. If I were going to spend more time on the animation, if I was going to like go into more detail, make more frames for it, you'd separate out each arm individually, probably each leg individually, and the head separately, just so that each component can be thought of in isolation and rendered separately. Here I'm drastically moving the character. I'm drastically going to change his body shape. So the first thing I wanted to do is copy the previous frame's body shape and put it up about the area where the character was going to end up, to make sure that I didn't have this weird scaling problem. I see it a lot in various animations where you get them, the character will do squash and stretch, or they'll just crazy deform, or they'll move really fast so that between frames they'll displace really fast, and you end up losing scale because you just assumed certain pixel sizes, and you end up losing, you either shrinking your character across the animation, or end up stretching them out, and your proportions and dimensions change. So I was trying to avoid that by making a copy of the character before moving him up, and then doing a lot of referencing from previous frames, because again, I wanted to make sure that the silhouette of the character was somewhat consistent throughout the entire animation. So doing a lot of cut and like grab from previous frame, move across, reposition the body, get him set up. And the only tweaks that I would then make to the silhouette would be like shift his legs in a specific area, turn his feet because of the way that his feet need to land or bend in order to create a body shape. The sword really didn't get too elaborate with crazy angles on the sword. Swords have this notorious, like pixel art in general is notorious for breaking when you get past like 45-degree angle, flat, or you can do 30-degree angles, you can do 60-degree angles fairly well. But anything other than the like 30, 45, 60, 90 angles with pixel art ends up breaking pretty hard when you have this resolution. Only 2 pixels breadth of the sword is going to cause you some problems. So for the most part, most of the actual frames don't break from those angles. And then just now, past couple seconds while I was talking, ended up copying the early frames, and then as a bulk, Aseprite's really nice, or Aseprite, I'm not really sure exactly how it's pronounced, but it's really good at allowing you to select several frames, copy, duplicate those over, and then in bulk reverse them and flip them horizontally so that I can have the character loop back to his initial position. And the nice thing about when I created these frames initially, I had a standard amount of movement of the character each frame as he was doing the chop, chop, chop. So I knew that going back, he'd be able to get back to his initial position based on the same amount of movement. So it would be consistent for each slice that he made. He would end up back moving at the same rate and consequently landing in the same position as he came back to the other side. And then at this point, for whatever reason, I realized that for one specific frame, I hadn't drawn his feet. This frame actually turned into one where I broke the rule of the 30-degree angles, just because I wanted to create this a little bit more delay at the top of the jump to make more impact when he comes down. And so I created another anticipation frame that just has that little bit more, like as he gets up to the jump from the attack, then pulls the sword behind his head, and then another frame of reach a little bit further back before coming all the way down. At this point, adding smears for the sword. I do really simple smears for this particular animation because, the animation isn't going to be high resolution anyways. I'd like to work on my smears. I think my smears need to be improved from what they are. Just doing a full, solid body as you go works. It does the basic needs of a smear. It doesn't incorporate the colors of the thing that is being smeared. It is, the whitest color that I had in the specific palette. Also, I am really enjoying this palette. I found it based on recommendations from a couple other pixel artists, and I feel like it does a good job of being subtle when it needs to, but also being nicely saturated and vibrant when it needs to. So I'll leave a link to this specific palette in the description below. And I'd like to experiment with a few different palettes in the future, because I've been doing a lot of pixel art with this one specifically, and getting more comfortable with it. But I'd like to try others and see what kind of imagery I can get out of those. I tried one today that was significantly desaturated, and it was difficult to work with because the variance in color was really minute. But anyways, back to this palette and this animation. I feel comfortable with the timing. I feel comfortable with the silhouette in all the different frames and the body shape and proportions, everything like that. My smears are adding some nice, cool, slicey motion and energy to the animation. So I went ahead and did the shading on the sword because it's basically the simplest thing to shade, and the thing I wanted to be standing out the most from the shading in the animation. Throughout the entire thing, the goal was to have the sword stick out as the focus, not the character. If you look at the character, you're like, yeah, it's a derpy dude made of squares. That's great. But ideally, if people were paying attention to the sword or looking closely at the sword, they'd be able to see things like added the sheen, added the shading, got a distinction between the blade side of the sword and the blunt side of the sword. So that was the first thing I shaded, and beyond the fact that it would be the simplest and basically dictate shading for the rest of the piece, it was one that I want to make sure felt nice moving as it went. So looping back through the animation here just to kind of get a feel for the sword and how it looks as I shade. And then moving on to the character, I initially didn't have a belt or sash or anything like that on the character, but I ended up adding it here before I started shading, just because it helped also define how the body deformed. I felt really good adding it into each of the frames to just get an idea of how his waist kind of bent, which would also help dictate shading and where colors needed to go. And then as soon as I get done with this particular section, yeah, this is me like trying to do copy paste and reversing, since it's nice when you're not shading yet, you can just copy paste later and then handle shading, because the light source for this particular piece animation is in the upper right, which means when he turns around, it's not going to be copy pasta after the shading is complete, because the light is going to move to the other side. If you just copy paste and reverse, that doesn't work, which is good. I think a lot of artwork and animation specifically looks better, feels better, and just works better if it has asymmetries in it, which is kind of hard to do when you have a looping animation like this. But I appreciate, like the fact that since I didn't do any shading initially, I just had laid down base colors. I could do a copy paste, flip horizontal. You have this nice loop, and then we can go in when we're actually rendering frames and get some nice shading that is actually specific to the direction he's facing. You see on the arms right here, I'm going per frame and just putting the shading on where the sleeves would be shaded, based on the direction of which way he's facing. Moving on to the body, now that that went way faster than the actual work. Again, this is 10x. So the entire work for this animation, to reiterate, is like 2.5 hours. This is 2.5 hours of work, and it's being condensed down into 15-20 minutes. So just be aware. So when I started doing shading on the body and the pants, and I thought it would be a lot easier to track both visually and from working standpoint if I put basically a sash kind of thing on the side of one of his legs. So this part I can't just do a clean copy paste and reverse, because the sash is specifically on his right leg, the right side of his gi. So when I do reverse the other direction, I have to make sure that follows the right leg rather than the left, and so that'll help me keep it's easier to keep straight in your mind when you actually do that too. So it ended up really helping the animation specifically. And so here, just using the reference of he's got a belt, he's got the sash on his gi, and where the arms positioned. Shading the arms first was specifically really helpful, because it gave me an idea of where the position of the arms would be, because the arms are going to cast a shadow on the body as they move, and it helped me out, just kind of really have this point of reference for, okay, the arms over there, the lights in the top right corner, where is that going to cast a shadow on the rest of the body if the body is distorting in this way. And I'm not having like that already figured out on this specific frame, because I didn't shade the other arm, but it's one frame. It's one frame. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. We're fine. And now reversing, again, I moved the sash over to the right leg, because it was on the right leg before, but that means it's on the lead leg as opposed to the trail leg now. And this is me going through all the frames and adding shading to the feet, because I was like, you know what, those feet need shading, and I have a color that I can use for the shading, and it will definitely just add a little bit more dimension to the character if I have shading in the feet. So that's what I was going to do. It was another easy thing you can knock out fairly quick. And if you just break it down piece by piece that way, it ends up being easier to know what you have done and what you haven't done. The most annoying thing you can have when you get done with an animation is to realize, oh no, I forgot feet in this frame of what is like 42 frames of animation right now. Well, shoot. You're going to see that every time you watch that animation. Nobody else may see it. Somebody's going to see it probably, but you will see it almost every time, because you'll remember that was the one frame you forgot, and it's pain in the butt. So just as many sanity checks as you can put in place to try and remember, okay, it's like, I'm doing the feet. Let's go every frame. Feet. 42 frames, feet are good. Okay. Legs. Takes a little bit longer, but at the same time, it does turn into its own sanity check, because ways that make you work faster are great. Ways that make you work faster but are prone to leave you having these errors that you forgot feet in a frame, not great. So finishing up rendering all the different frames, traveling back to the starting frame. Again, the light is in the top right corner, so I have to make sure that I don't just copy paste like flip. And I do all this with the sword just completely off right now, mostly because the speed at which the sword is moving is going to make it not really easy to track shadows, so I didn't want to worry about that too much. Also, the smears of the sword are going to cover most of the shadows that the sword would make, and beyond that, he holds the sword fully extended for the vast majority of frames in this animation, so it wouldn't really cast any shadows on his body. Let's see, we're getting close to the remake here. This is just me running back to the timing, feeling good about it. I had this weird ghosting effect where I had copied a frame previously and like the smears were off by a frame, so I ended up having to fix that towards the end here, and then running it back and forth, just really trying to look. Do I feel good about the timing? Do I feel good about the blending? Do I feel good about the shading? Everything like that. And I put a background in the back that wasn't blue, so I'm running it back with just a simple background that has like the greenish, nice contrast with the character that uses blues and grays and whatnot, and then the black hair and the orange. Really let the character stick out, let the sword stick out again as the main focus of the piece, and it ended up being a pretty good animation. And that's the process that I went through making that animation. Again, played back at about 10x speed. The entire time used to create the animation across 2 different sessions was about 2.5 hours of work. I was pretty proud of it. I was pretty happy with it. I know it's simple. I know the character really isn't really that elaborate, but for being a daily challenge and being a fairly simple animation that ended up being 42 frames of animation, it worked out fairly well. I'm curious what your thoughts on the process are, what suggestions you might have for improving that, or what you might be working on. Leave a comment about that below. And if you like this process video, let me know that you like it, and I'll probably try and do more of those. I try and do pixel dailies pretty often, so making another video like this wouldn't be that big of a deal. I think I'm going to try and do that again for some of my future pixel daily exercises. And until next time, have fun and keep working.